with Indonesia, with Malaysia, to tackle the scourge of people smuggling at its source. But don't throw it all away with this nasty, petty, divisive bill.
Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Greens will be opposing this bill. I want to start the speech tonight against this appalling, unnecessary and divisive piece of legislation with reminding this House about why we have a refugee convention. In the words of Rosa Sakharine, who was a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, I have the quotes from a British Refugee Council video. She said, "People don't like foreigners coming in. People didn't like me when I came here as a refugee from the Nazis. I escaped. Many millions didn't. I never saw my father again nor my brother. When Hitler came after the Jews, we had no legal right to go into any other country." The Refugee Convention gave people all around the world after Rosa the legal right to enter other countries when they were fleeing for their lives or escaping persecution. This bill breaks 50 years of consensus in this country of upholding that convention. That is no light thing to do. And I want to speak to the people of New Zealand who may be hearing the discussion coming from the government about these asylum seekers and refugees having a sense of this blind mass of people coming to invade this country, and remind them of some of the people who have been refugees. The Dalai Lama, who became a refugee in 1959 from Tibet and is today seen as one of the world's greatest spiritual leaders. More recently, Fang Lixi, excuse my pronunciation, a Chinese astrophysicist and pro-democracy activist who entered the US Embassy in Beijing after Chinese authorities cracked down on pro-democracy protests, something I would have thought this government would be wanting to encourage in the world, democracy. And since signing the convention in 1960, New Zealand has accepted refugees and asylum seekers from Czechoslovakia after the Prague uprising, Asians fleeing Uganda in the 70s, Chileans fleeing General Pinochet in the 70s, Jews and Eastern Europeans fleeing the Soviet Union through the times of repression in the 70s, those fleeing wars in Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos in the 70s and 80s, Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan in the 90s. We have offered shelter to these people. We have been a refuge for these people in their times of greatest need. And tragically, the world still has too many horrors, and it is an unsafe place for all too many people. And being as remote as we are, not many of these people make it to our shores. In fact, only about 300 asylum seekers every year make it to New Zealand. And I really, really want to remind the House, when we talk about doing our fair share internationally, that this is compared to the 2.7 million Afghans who Pakistan and Iran gave refuge to in 2010. And I would dare anyone to suggest that their economy and their society would be better equipped to process and handle that arrival of refugees than we would be. And we are so remote. We are in such a privileged place, and we have gained so much from refugees who have come to this country and started their life here, who have started businesses, started families, and contributed to our society. So what will this bill do to help these people needing a safe place in this world? Well, it will enable the courts to detain any group of 30 or more people, we're hearing the amendment will be to 30, who arrive together. It will limit family reunification to immediate family for those claiming refugee status after a mass arrival. It will provide the power for suspending processing of all refugee and protection claims by regulation without the oversight of this House. And it will remove the right of all claims to be heard some claims to be heard before the Immigration and Protection Tribunal for subsequent claims, along with the removal of certain rights of judicial review. In short, this bill breaches the Refugee Convention, international law and our own Bill of Rights Act. We heard wonderful submissions on this bill, very powerful submissions that offered a huge amount of expertise from organisations working in New Zealand, from people who have seen the impact of this kind of policy in Australia, who have provided us with expert advice and told us this is not the way to go. We heard from submitters like the UN High Commissioner for Refugees making a rare public submission, Amnesty International, the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, the New Zealand Law Society, the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, the International Detention Coalition, all opposed to this bill on the basis of the evidence. There was one submission supporting the bill. This submission advocated for the definition of mass arrival to be dropped to 2 people. I think that gives an indication of the quality of that submission. And the Human Rights Commission has made comments after the bill was reported back. So when the government says, well, we've made amendments, actually it doesn't do any of those terrible things you're saying it does, well, let me let you know what the Human Rights Commission had to say. They said the bill and associated policy changes unduly penalise asylum seekers for irregular entry to New Zealand in clear breach of Article 31 of the Refugee Convention. The detention provisions in the bill will result in arbitrary detention and breach of both New Zealand's obligation, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and Section 22 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. The suspension of applications from nationals of specific countries without providing them protection is discriminatory and may violate the right to seek asylum as guaranteed by international law. Restrictions on the right of judicial review proposed by the bill goes against the basic and long-standing constitutional right to challenge the legal validity of government's actions, as protected by the Bill of Rights Act. That is commentary on this bill in front of this House, not what we saw in the first reading or in submission, what we are considering now. It clearly breaches bills and conventions that we have had consensus on for 50 years. This is a big deal. This bill is being promoted by the government as being a deterrent to people smuggling and just a sensible pre-planning initiative to enable them to process a group of asylum seekers. Well, to very quickly address those points in turn, one, it's nothing to do with asylum being a deterrent for people smuggling, and if it was, that's an indication of it being a breach of the Refugee Convention, actually. And we have legislation to deal with people smuggling, and the harshest sentence that we've had around that has been 8 months home detention. So if the government wanted to do something about addressing people smuggling, then actually I would have thought that would be an area to start working rather than locking up the people who are most desperate. Further, to the point of actually this being a way of processing people, actually the way people arrive at the moment, they arrive and at customs they're told whether they're allowed in or not, and then they head out if they're told they're allowed in. And then they get a visa, short-term one, and then their application is processed. And in Auckland, we have a hostel for asylum seekers who don't have financial support. And this government has withdrawn funding for that centre that may provide some ability to assist people during that time. Does that not strike anyone as ironic? Here they are talking about needing assistance for processing people, and they've withdrawn the funding for one place that is actually providing support for people at this time and also enables the government to access and work with these people more easily. This is not about anything to do with administration, and it is not about people smuggling. I to be honest, I'm lost for words to know what on earth this could be about and what could be worth breaching our consensus on the Refugee Convention and undermining fundamental human rights and people's sense of security and belonging in this country, people that we should be valuing.
Mike Saban.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker.